Before I get into the thick of things, I feel like I should mention the very obvious fact that this video will have spoilers for Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony. Which, again, should be obvious. It's kind of hard to discuss one of the characters from it without having spoilers for the game. So if you don't want spoilers, you better scram now. Anyway, now that that's out of the way, Danganronpa V3 features a pretty colorful cast of characters. Naturally, as happens with any piece of media, some characters tend to get a lot more attention than others. Today, I want to talk about a character who I feel is often overlooked. I'd like to take a closer look at Ryoma Hoshi, the ultimate tennis pro. In the grand scheme of the story, he's a relatively minor character, largely due in part to his untimely departure in the second chapter. Although his time in the main story of the game is rather short-lived, there's a lot more to Ryoma than meets the eye. I will be starting by briefly covering Ryoma's design because it's quite literally the first thing you see about him. Even before speaking to him, you can see his sprite. In a heavily visuals-based medium like video games, the design of a character can, and I would argue should, give you a bit of insight into that character. Ryoma has one of the more unique designs in Danganronpa, in part because, at only 3 feet and 5 inches, he's the shortest character in the franchise. Yes, this is including the kids in Ultra Despair Girls. He's even shorter than them by about a foot. He also stands on a box at his podium in the trial for Chapter 1, which I think is hilarious. Ryoma's hat is also easily noticed because of the 2 little spike things that stick out from it. The hat features an image of 2 blue tennis rackets, signifying his position as the ultimate tennis pro. He wears a leather jacket with a blue and black striped jumpsuit underneath, which resembles the outfit of a prisoner. Additionally, although it's not always visible on screen when you're talking to him, Ryoma wears a metal cuff with a short length of chain on his left ankle. Since this kind of resembles a ball and chain, just without the massive heavy metal ball, this further signifies a connection between Ryoma and prison. Another fairly minor detail of Ryoma's design is that he's pretty much always got a little candy stick that can be mistaken for a cigarette. It ties in kind of nicely with the candy sticks gift being one of his favorites to receive for his free time events. Overall, Ryoma's design manages to incorporate 2 of the major topics around his character, which are tennis and prison. And I may not know anything about character design and what makes a good one or what makes a bad one, but this seems pretty decent to me. Like I mentioned before, Ryoma isn't in the main story of the game for very long, but for the time that he is there, he's hardly just a background character. Ryoma is first introduced in the prologue, like every other character in the game. Kaede and Shuichi first meet him in the game room. Right off the bat, he has a pretty distant and disinterested attitude. He's not interested in finding an exit, pretty quickly saying that the academy is pretty cool compared to prison. It's during his introduction in the prologue that we also learn of Ryoma's talent as the ultimate tennis pro, but also that he has distanced himself from that title. He says it's an old story and refers to himself as an empty shell of the man he once was. Additionally, we hear he went to prison for killing a bunch of people in the mafia, which is an awful lot to learn about someone you just met, like, 20 seconds ago. Later on, when the killing game is first revealed to the students, Ryoma asks if they'll be given weapons to kill each other, which immediately not a great look. When Kaido is pretty reasonably shocked by this, Ryoma explains that he's just trying to get more information because, well, they can't exactly do anything if they know nothing. This explanation for his seemingly suspicious question shows a bit of his practical nature. After the prologue in the first chapter is when we see one of the most significant moments for Ryoma. Kaede discovers Ryoma and Rantaro having an argument in the dining room. Ryoma explains that he has an idea. He will allow himself to be killed so that his killer can take advantage of the first blood perk, which would allow his killer to escape without a trial. His killer can then run for help to rescue everyone else. On the surface, this plan does kind of make sense. Ryoma's looking at it from an extremely practical perspective. He doesn't value his own life much, he doesn't see a reason for him to keep living, so he's not exactly against the idea of giving up his life if he believes it can guarantee everyone else gets to escape. I, however, see a major flaw with Ryoma's suggestion, and that's the fact that it relies on the assumption that the person who escapes would even be able to seek help for everyone else. The entire group at this point believes the killing game is some sort of underground criminal operation, which is a totally fair assumption to make. But under this belief, that the Killing Game is being run by criminals, it wouldn't make sense for them to just allow someone to get out. Because, obviously, if that one person escapes and gets help for everyone else, the entire Killing Game gets shut down. Is this something Ryoma completely overlooked? Possibly. No one else points out this issue, and he's instead talked out of his suggestion by Rantaro, who insists that he is going to end the Killing Game. As a side note, I truly do love Rantaro with all of my heart, but he does not do himself any favors by being so vague and cryptic. He just says he has a way to end the game, refuses to elaborate, and somehow that works? It convinces Ryoma not to sacrifice himself, which I guess is what Rantaro was going for. Whatever. I'm getting sidetracked. Later on in the first chapter, Ryoma is pretty involved in the trial for Rantaro's death. Near the start, he suggests that Rantaro knew about the hidden door in the library because the mastermind told him about it in order to lure him there and kill him, which, as far as I can recall, and keep in mind it's been like 2 years at this point since I played V3, that assumption and theory is not entirely wrong. Later into the trial, when suspicion falls on Tsumugi, Ryoma points out that she could have disguised herself in order to kill Rantaro. It's not a terrible point because Tsumugi is the ultimate cosplayer, but it's flawed for a couple reasons. The first, Ryoma didn't know at the time when he made this argument. Cospox. Cospox is a condition where Tsumugi basically breaks out in hives and has a sort of allergic reaction if she tries to cosplay as a real person. But the second issue with this idea is something seemingly nobody mentions. In context, Tsumugi was being accused, or was at least being suspected, because she was at first in the dining room with a few other people and then left to go to the bathroom. The idea was that she could have gone to the library and killed Rantaro in that time, but she was arguing that she wasn't gone long enough to actually invite suspicion on her. If you were to factor in Ryoma's idea that she disguised herself, it would make it even less likely for her to be the killer, because it would take even more time to put on and then take off a disguise to commit the murder. Basically, I guess what I'm saying is Ryoma is definitely smart, but even he misses things from time to time. Ryoma is the opponent of the first rebuttal showdown in the game. He argues the culprit could have been hiding inside the library before any cameras were set up and then left after killing Rantaro. Kaede points out that the killer would have been caught on one of the cameras if they left after committing the murder, so Ryoma then changes his theory to say that the killer hid back in the library again and then pretended to rush in with everybody else when the body was discovered. Ultimately, the rebuttal showdown ends when Kaede presents a series of photos that show every single person running into the library, thus proving that there was no one hiding in there. After this, Ryoma backs down and doesn't keep arguing, and in fact this kind of happens multiple times during the trial. He presents a theory or an idea, it's proven wrong, and he just ends it there without carrying it on any further. Throughout the trial, Ryoma is shown to be very calm and composed even in such a high-stress situation. He remains practical, tries to keep everybody else on track, and never seems to panic or grow upset, although he definitely is frustrated after Kaede is executed, saying that he's never felt quite so irritated in his life. In the second chapter, Ryoma's lab is opened up. The lab resembles a tennis court with a bunch of equipment that I'm about 90% sure doesn't exist in real life. Ryoma tries to distance himself from the sport of tennis, claiming that he doesn't care about it anymore and doesn't have anything to do with it. But Shuichi notices Ryoma is looking at the tennis court with such sad eyes, which definitely hints that Ryoma has not truly let go of his past. Later in the chapter, the motive videos are distributed, and these videos are meant to show each student the people who are most important to them. However, the videos get completely mixed up and nobody gets their own. While most of the group agrees to not redistribute the videos because it could just fall into the trap of giving someone a motive to kill, Ryoma disagrees and wants to see his own video. Kaito takes this as Ryoma wanting a motive to kill, but I really don't think this is the case. More than anything, Ryoma is desperate. Not to kill, not to escape, but to find a reason to keep living. He believes he has nothing, and then he's told that this video supposedly shows someone who's important to him, so of course he wants to see it. He wants to know who and what he still has. And then Ryoma turns up dead as the second victim in the Killing Game. Beyond this point, he's obviously not seen much because well, he's dead. But the trial still manages to reveal something absolutely significant. As it turned out, Maki was the one who received Ryoma's video. She later handed it over to him so he could watch it. Like I said before, he was hoping to find any reason to keep living. Sure, he had given up in a way, but he hadn't given up so gravely that he wouldn't even try to look for a reason to keep going. And what did that video show him? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. That was kind of the last straw for Ryoma. He was already down so low and thought he had no reason to live anymore, and then the videos are introduced and he's given even the slight chance that he still has something left, and then he finally watches it and there's just nothing. At the end of the second trial, Kirumi is revealed as Ryoma's killer. She explains that she told him about her position as the de facto prime minister of Japan. By this point, by the time Kirumi told Ryoma about, the whole de facto prime minister of Japan thing, she had already chosen him as her target to kill, probably because she was there in the first chapter when he was making the suggestion to sacrifice himself. Kirumi claims that Ryoma turned his back on her as a way to let her kill him, which is when she knocked him out and then drowned him. How truthful she's being is sort of up for debate here. Did Ryoma actually let her kill him, or is she sort of twisting things in her mind to justify her actions to herself? Considering what she believed, it's hard to say she was being unreasonable to put an entire country over the lives of about a dozen other people, but that doesn't mean it would have been an easy decision for her. Whether or not Kurumi's being entirely honest is irrelevant though. By that point, regardless of if she's telling the truth or not, Ryoma was definitely at his lowest. In terms of the main story, that's where Ryoma's part ends. He dies in the second chapter, his murder is solved in a trial, and then he's pretty much never mentioned again, which I think kinda sucks. But that doesn't mean we're done here, because there is still plenty more to look at. Through Ryoma's free time events, we can learn a lot more about him and his past. He reveals plenty of details about himself to Kaede and Shuichi during his free time events that are otherwise never mentioned during the main story. Since Ryoma has more available free time events with Shuichi, we'll learn a lot more through their interactions. During the free time events, Ryoma tells Shuichi about his friends from tennis club, as well as the rivals that he faced against. These particular stories have a lot of references to Prince of Tennis, which is a media I know literally nothing about, but the references are there. Ryoma also tells Shuichi how he eventually ended up in prison. As the story goes, Ryoma received an invitation to an underground tennis competition that was being held on a luxury liner owned by the Mafia. People were gambling on the competition, which Ryoma was not on board with. He played along at first, but at the last second, he defeated the opponent he was supposed to lose against. Unsurprisingly, the Mafia was not happy about this, and as retaliation, they killed Ryoma's entire family. He hid his girlfriend and left her in an attempt to keep her safe, but this ultimately proved pointless when the Mafia tracked her down and killed her anyway. He expresses remorse over his decision and wishes that he had stayed with his girlfriend rather than leaving her. To get back at the Mafia, Ryoma massacred them, which was what landed him in prison. Having lost everything, he gave up on his past and tried to leave it behind, although this evidently didn't quite work. In his first free time event with Kaede, Ryoma reveals he had a cat. He let someone he knew take care of the cat when he went to prison, and he remembers the cat fondly and clearly cares a lot about it. His profile in the game says he likes Russian blues, so it's very likely that his cat is a Russian blue breed of cat. Ryoma's background plays a huge role into his character and the way he thinks and behaves. His low self-esteem and poor outlook on life are rooted in the loss of everything he knew and loved. Despite his attempts to throw away his past, it definitely still clings to him, and he doesn't truly want to leave it behind. One of the traits of Ryoma's personality that we see pretty early on is his distance. He's not interested in getting close to other people, and this is at least due in part to his low self-esteem. He thinks no one should bother with him. Multiple times when he starts to talk about himself, he just kind of stops and says he's talked too much. Possibly in an attempt to let go of a past he thinks he can never return to, Ryoma tries to lean very hard into his label as a murderer. He brings it up kind of frequently, especially by asking Kaede Kaede and Shuichi why they would want to hang out with him during his free time events. He carries a lot of guilt and remorse over his decisions. It's likely that he not just regrets massacring the Mafia, but also blames himself for the deaths of his family and girlfriend since he went against the Mafia's plan in the first place. Ryoma is also shown to be pretty observant of other people. During the investigation for Rantaro's death, he correctly guesses that Shuichi already suspects someone even though Shuichi tries to deny it. He also notices changes in Shuichi, like how he has a newfound resolve after Kaede's death. Like I've pointed out before, Ryoma is pretty practical. He doesn't easily get sidetracked, and he tries to focus on what can be done. When the killing game is revealed, he asks about weapons to gain more information. More than once, he tells everyone else that standing around and complaining won't achieve anything. Although his practicality is obviously helpful much of the time, when mixed with his low self-esteem and lack of a will to live, it can easily be carried too far. This is most clearly shown when he wants to sacrifice himself to save everyone else. It's possible both of these traits together, his practicality and his lack of a will to live, kind of mix in the worst way and cause him to tunnel vision on this solution, which maybe led to him completely missing the problem I pointed out earlier, where you can't reliably assume that the person who leaves would even be able to get help for everyone else. Ryoma is also shown to be very sharp, often piecing things together pretty quickly. When the underground passage is discovered and the group fails to make it through on the first try, Ryoma says Monokuma and the Cubs let the group try on purpose so that they would fail and then realize escape is impossible. He sees right past the question of why would they let us try for this seemingly obvious exit, and easily reaches the answer of, well, they knew we would fail. Later, at the start of the investigation for Rantaro's death, Kaede and Shuichi reveal their plan to catch the mastermind. Kaido asks why they hit the plan, to which Ryoma guesses that everyone would have fought over the identity of the mastermind if they knew it was one of them. Kaede confirms that was the reason for her and Shuichi to hide the plan. Also during the investigation, Kirumi suggests that nobody investigate alone. Gonta asks why, and Ryoma points out that the culprit, if allowed to search by themselves, could destroy evidence and interfere with the investigation. I don't know if it was intentional for Ryoma to repeatedly be the one to reach these answers and explanations, but it definitely helps to build consistency with his character. And finally, one of Ryoma's most obvious traits, and the one that drags him down the most, is, well, he's hopeless. He's given up on everything. He threw away his past and tries to tell himself there's no point in returning to it. Although he at least tries to reach for a reason to keep living by watching his own motive video, those hopes are immediately dashed against the rocks when it turns out he truly has no one left. In the end, if Kirumi is to be believed, that's the trait that does Ryoma in. It's his hopelessness that gets him killed. Although Ryoma is given the title of Ultimate Tennis Pro, right from his introduction, he tries to distance himself from it. He repeatedly says he doesn't care about tennis and has nothing to do with it anymore. He believes there's no coming back from what he did, and so it's better to just forget about it. However, we see more than once that this approach is not working for him. When his lab opens up, Shuichi notices that he's looking at the tennis court with sad eyes. During his free time events with Shuichi, he talks about his friends in tennis club and the people he faced against, and Shuichi points out that he seems like he's having fun telling these stories. By the end of the free time events with Shuichi, Ryoma has resolved to pick things back up once he's out of prison. Shuichi's goal was to get Ryoma to reconnect with his past and convince him it wasn't too late for him, and he manages to achieve exactly that. But of course, that's only in the free time events. At first, the conclusion of Ryoma's free time events can seem to present a bit of a contradiction with the events of the main story of the game. If he decided he'd pick things back up once he leaves prison, how did he then immediately go and give up again? I'd argue that Ryoma's development in the main story still makes perfect sense with his free time events concluded, and in fact can seem even more devastating. His free time events can only be finished before he's killed, and also before he ever sees his video. Without the free time events, Ryoma's outlook on life is pretty much just a sharp decline after he sees the video. But with the completed free time events factored in, it's instead a leap before the sudden decline. Through spending time with Shuichi and reconnecting with tennis and his past, Ryoma finally starts to have some hope again. Then he sees his empty video. He sees there's nothing left for him. The video doesn't show his cat, the person he left it with, his old tennis friends, even any of his rivals. To me, that's even more tragic. If you take the finished free time events into account, you can even see Ryoma wanting to see his video as a sign of his renewed hope, a way for him to see what he has left, what he can still pick back up once he's out of prison, something that only ends in more tragedy when the video turns up empty. It's a heartbreaking ending on its own, but even worse when you add in his genuine hope of picking things up. Ryoma's time in prison has greatly influenced the way he thinks. He got used to being in prison, and it also set his standards so low that he even thinks the academy, where he's still kind of trapped and not able to leave, is much better. As he tells Kaede, he lived a very structured life in prison. The prisoners had to eat and do their work at the same time, and at night, there was nothing to do but sleep. During the Salmon bonus mode, Ryoma reveals he considers such simple things as green tea, fresh air, and a peaceful walk as luxuries because he just never had those in prison. Ryoma has kind of just accepted his new identity as a prisoner rather than a tennis player. His exact sentence is never stated, but if he massacred a mafia, it's likely he'll be there for a very long time, if not his entire life. He sees returning to his previous life as just not an option. In a way, Ryoma's made himself a prisoner twice. Not just in the literal sense of being imprisoned for murdering a bunch of mafia members, but also he's turned himself into a prisoner of his own mind. He's locked himself into believing he has nothing left, and there's no reason to keep going or to try to return to his previous life. The more serious thing to discuss here is the implication that Ryoma has experienced sexual assault during his time in prison. It's not directly stated, but it is hinted at least a couple of times. The first time it's implied is after his lab is opened. Miu is in the lab with him and Shuichi. If Shuichi inspects the shower room, Miu makes a very crude joke about Shuichi and Ryoma going into the bathroom and something, sexual happening, specifically mentioning Ryoma's height. And Ryoma is shown to not appreciate this joke very much, to put it lightly. He doesn't say a word in response to Miu, he just kind of stares at her hard enough until she backs down and tries to brush it off as just a joke. There's no sort of awkward laugh or anything, and he doesn't even tell her to stop or not talk like that. His response is a pretty clear expression of discomfort and shows that Miu crossed a line she really shouldn't have. The other two hints towards Ryoma's experience of sexual assault both happen in the Salmon bonus mode. Although the events of the mode are obviously not canon to the story of the main game, they are still relevant in terms of the characters' personalities and backstories. In the library, it's possible for Shuichi to suggest that they read a dirty book. Ryoma declines and shows disinterest, saying that seeing that sort of thing doesn't make him feel anything anymore. This could be taken as an implication of sexual assault, although it could also be viewed as just a loss of interest in sexual topics and activities that can happen when someone is depressed. And it's hard to argue that Ryoma isn't depressed, so this could be taken as an alternative explanation, especially since his response to this read a dirty book suggestion isn't nearly as strong as his response to Miu's joke. The last hint, though, is more obvious. In the gym, Shuichi can suggest that they take off their clothes, to which Ryoma tells him to stop and says he's having flashbacks from prison. This is about as blatant as it can possibly be without the game literally spelling it out for you. It can be easy to dismiss the love suite scenes as, these ridiculous scenes that aren't meant to be taken seriously. But in some cases, for certain characters, they can actually reveal a lot more than you might think. I believe that's the case for Ryoma. Within the scene, Shuichi is meant to assume the role of Ryoma's ideal fantasy or something like that. Plenty of the love suite scenes have either vaguely or blatantly sexual tones, but Ryoma's is one of a few that doesn't. Within the scene, Shuichi is Ryoma's former tennis manager. Ryoma tries to tell Shuichi to stop chasing after him, but throughout the scene, Shuichi insists on remaining by his side. This scene represents Ryoma's buried wish to return to his previous life. The whole point of it is Shuichi insisting on staying with him despite Ryoma at first thinking it's better to cut ties. The love suite scene dives further into showing that Ryoma truly doesn't want to let go of his past. It can also be interpreted as revealing that Ryoma really wants someone to stay with him despite his insistence that he's just not worth anyone's time. Basically, yes, I am taking a love suite scene seriously, and no, I'm not apologizing for it, and no, you cannot stop me. Ryoma's entire character revolves around a theme of losing everything you have and being faced with two choices: giving up or pushing on. Throughout all possibilities of the game, including the non-canon bonus mode, we see him explore both options. In the main story, Ryoma gives up. He sees his video, learns he has nothing left, and resigns himself to death. In his free time events and the Salmon Team bonus mode, Ryoma instead decides to keep living. He says he'll get out of prison and pick up whatever he can find. To me, it's really sad that the canonical conclusion is his death. He dies hopeless, believing there's no chance left for him, no way to go back, nothing to return to, and no point in even trying. Ryoma is a character I've actually wanted to do a sort of analysis on for a while now, but because I'm a huge procrastinator, I just kept not doing it until finally I sat down and it was like, okay, we're just gonna do it this time. And so I did it, and unsurprisingly, Ryoma went from a character I just kind of liked to one I really, really appreciate. I hope this has given you a better understanding and appreciation of Ryoma too. It's easy to overlook him because he dies so early into the game. He's the victim in the second chapter, he doesn't even make it halfway through. But if anything, I think his short-lived time in the main story is all the more reason to take a closer look at him. That's really all I've got to say here. I hope you enjoyed. I love Ryoma now, and have a good day.